Welcome everybody. End of a crazy week in the market. Probably the first time we've seen it like this since we started doing these in 8 weeks, right?
Yep.
To this degree. So it's been busy. It's been busy, but a couple things I do want to mention. Since we made the move in November, we've obviously that was a big move for us, but it wasn't just Ben and I. I don't know, most people haven't seen or heard of all the people that work on the outside do helping us open accounts. We had over 1,000 accounts to open. So as you can imagine, the paperwork and the tracking and everything to deal with that. And not only that, it's a whole new level of systems for Ben and I to learn and somebody to mentor us. And we had an amazing mentor that kind of walked us through that time and held our hand through those few months. And we really couldn't have done our weather. Today is our last day. Anne, who's normally on here. So we just wanted to publicly thank her for all of her help. And we're kind of on our own, so to speak. We still do have really good support system here, and she still will be available, but I'm not working directly with our team as of today. So we'd like to make a public thank you for all the work that you've done, and we really appreciate it. Setting us up. I think we're set up to do big things here, so we appreciate it. The other thing is big week for the podcast. I don't know if everybody's been watching those on YouTube and or listening to those on the podcast platforms, but we've been saying that we've been going to do a podcast on Bitcoin to kind of really find somebody that could break it down for us. So a real expert, and Ben did that. He found Pascal Saint-Jean. So Ben did a interview with him last night. I watched it this morning, started editing. It's amazing. I think it's exactly what you guys have been asking for. So I'm going to finish editing that probably tomorrow, and I'll put it up likely tomorrow or Sunday. And that'll be available on the YouTube channel and the podcast platforms. Anything else you want to say about that that interview, Ben?
Yeah, look, I mean, Pascal's an interesting guy. We've known each other for about 3 years now, but he was a cryptographer before it was anything. So he's been understand crypto markets and blockchain and Bitcoin, and I think does a great job of just really simplifying it and trying to hit some of those key highlights we were looking for. It could have been another 3 hours, so we'll definitely do a follow on to discuss some of the others. We didn't have a chance to go into Ethereum and some of the other things that are out there, but we hit Bitcoin and kind of the genesis and how it got there and how it is where it is today, and I think answer a lot of the questions that have been coming up as we moved along.
Yeah, and somebody asked in the chat if we could send out a specific email when that comes out.
Okay,
with the
sure.
link. It's
Yeah,
probably worth it to let everybody
yeah,
know it's kind of a special one. So we'll
sure.
definitely do that. Thanks for the reminder there, whoever put that in the chat. Before we get moving on to the actual business, if, most of you guys have been on this every week, so it's fine. But if you're looking to ask a question, you can type it in the chat. I monitor the chat or the Q&A. So all this is found at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it, then just hover, kind of move your mouse over it and something will pop up. There's a Q&A button too that you can actually ask a question there as well, or you can raise your hand if you want to do an audio or video question at the end as well. Okay. All right, man. You look rough today, bud. You know why? You look like you've been in the trenches with the markets. They just
Yeah.
bloodied and bashed.
Yeah, it was an interesting week for sure. I just looked at S&P in Canadian dollars for the week was minus 2.5. So that's a pretty serious adjustment. We're gonna just jump into that. We want to talk about that right now.
You ever?
Okay, let's go. Yeah. So we had obviously the week's been pretty negative across the board. And what was different, I guess, the last couple of days, particularly yesterday, was that we saw every asset class down across the board. So we had stocks down, we had bonds down, we had commodities down. The only asset class that was up, of course, was the almighty US dollar. And so it certainly shows us that, that dollar is really that anti-risk asset. And so as I look at it and pay attention to it, that's been probably the biggest signal there. But we saw that kind of that level that I thought could be the top of the US 10-year where we touched that 1.5, and bonds rallied today a little bit. And let me just see where we closed out with bonds. Yeah, so pretty good rally because US 10 years back to 140. It got up to kind of 151 and change yesterday. And so a 10 basis point rally in a single day is actually pretty material. So we'll see. So I guess the question when we get kind of the kind of selling that we saw this week is this changing direction? Is it a trend change? Is this we'll call it a complete pivot to a different part of the economic cycle? And so you look at kind of the other signals, because price is one signal, but so is volume and volatility. And so volume actually was really low all week, super low, like 20% plus down month over month. And most days it continued to be quite light, including today. So you look at price, you look at volume, and the last one is volatility. So volatility spiked yesterday, and it again came back down. Volatility was down about 5-6% today, but markets were still mixed. Nasdaq was up today, but if we look at the other indices, the Dow still finished down about 1.5%, and TSX was down about 1%, 90 basis points actually for the day. And volatility is coming down. So volume is coming down, volatility is coming down, and the market is going down. That typically signals that most of this is just temporary. It's kind of inter-trend changes. And so as a result of that, I made the decision to obviously buy stocks.
Do you think it's when the market's like this, does it make your job more difficult, or is it easy? Do you like this time because the opportunities are there when the markets are down, or how do you look at it?
Yeah, so I like this time. It's running into a burning building.
Yeah.
And it is a matter of going and looking at, what should I do? What should I buy? So, I mean, the first decision is the trend changing? And so once you've answered that for yourself, obviously you can't know for 100% certainty, but once you've answered that for yourself, that I don't think the trends has changed because of these factors, then you decide what you're going to do. And so absolutely, when things sell off, I certainly like it. I'm happy about it. It gives you a chance. Some of these companies you may have wanted to buy, and then you watch them and you watch them and you watch them, and they just crank up and up and up, and you can't do anything. And then when you get some hard sell-offs, it's finally a relief, that you can take advantage of those sell-offs. So I like when we have these kind of periods, particularly when you have conviction that it's not a material change that's happening.
Right.
So
Interesting.
yeah, so I'd look at here, like this is, if we look up here, these are the sells for the week and these are the buys for the week.
Okay.
So yeah, so there's obviously lots of names on there. So maybe I'll rhyme off a couple of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, go
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Well, let them know what you're buying and selling.
Yeah. So I mean, the one country that I'd bought a few weeks ago was Brazil. It actually signaled that we're entering a bad economic phase. So I actually decided to sell Brazil and buy Nasdaq this week. So the triple Qs. The other thing is I sold some short-term U.S. Treasuries to buy some other stuff. But on the buy list, some of these names we already own, like excuse me, Spirit Airways added to, EXPC and CLA, those are, and BSPE, those are, all three of those are SPACs. When we had that first hard down day, I think it was Monday, some of these things dropped like 20% at the open. So added those, and they firmed up right up into the close here. I think if I look at how we finished, I think most of those finished pretty close to where they started last Friday. So had pretty big moves into the end of the week. So added those. India was one that I actually traded. I'd taken some profits and then added back to the position a couple of times this week on some weakness. Japan was another one, EWJ. The other kind of crypto name that we've talked about a few times was Galaxy Digital. It's Novograt's company. Again, that was another one that Monday morning gapped down hard, like 25, 30%, and recovered, and it's trading similar to where it was at the end of last week. MicroStrategy has started to pick away at because it came off pretty hard. It's down about 50% from its highs. The other place was China, CHIQ, which is the consumer, MSOS, which is cannabis, Facebook. The one name that came down, which I've been watching for a long time, is Descartes Systems. So it's a Canadian company. They do kind of logistics. So we're probably one of the biggest global logistics companies. Very interesting business, but it kind of crept up into the 80s, and I didn't want to buy it there. It came to back down to the low 70s, and so it gave me a chance to pick away at it. And for the first time added a bond ETF. So as we move up to the high end of yields, I'm starting to think about, I think we're kind of in the topper end of it, and starting to think about deploying cash and adding duration, which is going to add protection in the slowdown that I expect in the second half.
Oh, well, that's a lot of buying.
hmm
It's a lot of movement, right? Buying and selling.
Yes,
So,
it was. It's one of the busiest weeks that I can think of in the last couple of years.
really, that's
Yeah,
nice.
yeah, yeah.
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, it's been going on. I mean, I've been working with you for probably about 6 months now, and basically just gone one direction. So it's interesting to
Yeah.
see to see how you react now that it's going the other way,
Yeah.
right? So it's interesting for me to see as well.
Yeah.
Couple things in the news here that I just kind of want to get your reaction on.
Sure.
Rising interest rates may continue to test the stock market in the weeks ahead.
hmm
How does that correlate exactly?
Yeah. So I think that it is something to think about, where rates with rates moving up. I think that's a general fear that money is going to flow into, we'll say, bonds, because rates have moved up. The place it typically puts a lot of pressure on would be like the high tech, the high growth companies that rely on cheap capital to grow their businesses. And so, if we think that rates are going to continue to creep higher, which I don't think, then yeah, potentially you should be concerned. I do think that the alternative is going to happen is that we're going to come in with some kind of yield curve control. I know that the Federal Reserve has started to already talk about the yields creeping up a little bit too high, and so I think that the risk of higher rates is the risk that money goes to buy something else, right? People look to buy, you can buy a 10-year at 1.5. That's up, 100% from where it was 6 months ago. So I guess the risk is, if this continues to go higher, that means there's something probably wrong. The historical economists would say a steepening yield curve shows for positive economic activity. I would tend to disagree with that, because that's really kind of archaic thinking. But I'd say that you may see some of that in the press, where people say, steepening yield curve, the economy must be in great shape. But as yields creep up, particularly, we've talked a little bit about this in the past, where yields creep up, and particularly in the US, where all of their mortgages are based off of the 30-year. So if you have a 30-year now up north of 2%. Well, you slap the bank markup on top of that. You got mortgage rates starting to push up to 2-year highs in the U.S. That's going to put pressure on the consumer. If the consumer is stressed, they're not going to spend money, and that makes for not a healthy U.S. economy.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I'm not sure if anybody had any questions. You can now be the time to kind of chime in as we're kind of discussing world events. Ben, did you have anything else specific to the clients' portfolios, or
Yes. So I mean, just the last couple of things, I've tried to give updates on deals and what's happening there, and money raising. It did slow down a little bit this week, but you still have companies coming to market. A few IPOs, which again we haven't seen in a while. So particularly in Canada, actual IPOs, not just the bought deals. So we had 3 or 4 of those this week. We had a number of bonds. Fairfax raised money in a couple of tranches. Those would be triple Bs. And then today we had province of BC and Quebec both raise bonds at this point too. So, they must need the money if they're doing it right now because yields have moved up. So, you tend to see the big issuance on the yields or on the bonds when yields are lower. So, they must need the money right now if they're going to continue to raise capital into a higher rate environment.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah.
One other thing I noticed, do you read Warren Buffett's annual report or letter that he sends out every year?
I used to, but I don't read it anymore.
You don't really subscribe to that thinking anymore, eh?
Well, he's still interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, his process is interesting and unique, but what do you have to say this year?
Oh, I don't know. It comes out on Saturday.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I used to really enjoy him, and I've read Snowball and I've read a lot of the things that have been written about him. So he's an interesting person, and for what he did and for the time he did it, I think it was great, and people continue to stand on and pay attention to what he's doing. Like he sold Barrick Gold last week, and so everyone's panicking, saying, maybe he doesn't believe in gold. All of a sudden, he's never believed in gold, but you get a lot of that chase, right, where people say, he buying this company, he must know what he's doing. Let's buy that company too. So you get a lot of chase that happens into that.
Yeah.
So I think that that'll continue to be the case.
Well, his number 2 came out too and said he saw Bitcoin the same as he sees gold, right? Which he's never. But it's Charlie, right?
Charlie Munger, yeah.
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 So that's interesting. That's one thing we didn't mention today either. Is we've been somewhat the cheerleaders, crypto and Bitcoin, but that's down hard too. So.
Yeah, so it is. I mean, in some cases, though, some of the names, like I say, Galaxy Digital, for example, like that really hung in relative to what happened in the broad market. So some of the names hung in. It's a strange. As I look across my screen, I keep pointing to it over here because you see a lot of the greens and reds. But so it was interesting to see which names stayed in the green this week, and that one was one of them. So. I think maybe the more followed names, like you mentioned, like MicroStrategy, those came down hard. But the commodity itself, like Bitcoin, commodity currency, whatever you want to call it, actually hung in pretty well. And I think we finished the week relatively reasonable. Let me just see where we finish on crypto.
Yeah. Well, looking at that too, I noticed that that even though they were down, MicroStrategy's actually announced they bought another $1 billion in Bitcoin. So they're obviously positioning well. I mean, a lot of these institutions are taking the down as an opportunity to get in, to put more money in. So
yeah, and so obviously, and in the presentation last night, Pascal comments on MicroStrategy. And so he hits a couple of highlights on what happened there and how they do that, how these institutions actually buy into the currency.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
We got our friend Lyle for the question.
Okay. Sure.
Whenever you're ready there, Lyle.
Can I talk?
Yep,
Yeah.
you're live.
All right. So in the last week, there's an interesting article I read that was trying to characterize the um, principal debate going on in democracies, including the US, on the question of government debt and spending.
Yep.
And if I've got the story right, this world famous economist, I think he was the chief economist at the OECD. I can't remember his name. I think it was something like Summers or something. Did some major paper, which is raised the question of the debate that the principle was, if I got it right, he said, as long as the real interest rate managed by central banks is less than the real annual growth in the country, GDP, I assume, then governments can spend as much as they want because they'll be able to maintain that excess spending and debt by the economy yielding, I suppose, tax income greater than the interest debt. So that, and now there's other economists that disagree fundamentally.
Yeah.
But I thought that was pretty fascinating, and give support to those in governments who say the issue is not really, as long as the interest rates are low enough and the growth is big enough, we can keep doing this and save the economy, et cetera.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw it. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess the answer is, I suppose. I think that Japan's done a pretty good example, or done a pretty good take of that, where, as long as we peg interest rates at zero, the debt never carries any payment. So, I think that the answer is potentially yes. I guess at some point, what will have to happen though is that there's nobody that's going to want to buy their currencies anymore or buy their debt anymore. So I'd say maybe if everybody's doing it, yes. If everybody's doing it, yes. But if you get a country like China, for example, saying we're not going to do that, then you run a risk of the rest of the world kind of getting into trouble. But if everyone's doing that, I suppose if you have zero interest rates, then, or negative interest rates, then you can continue to pump money into the economy. But that's meaning you'll be able to control everything. So it's just like, I think I've described in the past, it's like having a 100-pound gorilla on your back. You can walk for a long time with that on your back, but at some point, something's going to go wrong. And the risk is that people stop buying your stuff, and your stuff would be your bonds and your debt. And so that debt's going to have to be consumed somewhere. So right now, what Japan's doing is they're buying their own debt. So, and the rest of the world is buying their own debt too. So, at some point that comes into question, what is your currency worth? And that's the real gist of how crypto plays a part, and potentially gold plays a part in the world too. Does that make sense, you think?
I think so.
Yeah.
Already muted him, so.
Okay.
I hope that made sense.
Yeah, we can take it.
Okay, anybody else have a question? Well, we're gonna wrap it up on this Friday afternoon. Beautiful Friday afternoon. Ben wants to get out there and do some tobogganing. I have no idea what plan.
Not yet. I need some more warm weather. Go for a run.
Yeah, exactly. If you guys have any topics or any questions that you guys want us to cover in these things, you certainly let us know ahead of time, and we'd be happy to prepare something as well too. But for the most part, these are just to let you know, exactly what we're working on from a week-to-week basis. That's the one thing we didn't maybe touch on. Maybe it's just more of the same you're looking at for next week. But next week, is there anything that's piquing your interest, or do you think just hoping for more buying?
Well, listen, this is month end as well. So this Monday is a new day, it's a new month. And so I think, if what happens on Monday, which I expect to happen, is you actually see volumes come back. And so volumes coming back will indicate the direction likely for the rest of the month. So when volumes come back, if Monday is a green day, I'd expect we have some positive momentum and sentiment that kind of takes us through the next couple of weeks. So, if that is the way it plays out, then there'll probably be some selling at some point in March. So if there's more selling on Monday and rates start to move higher, then I'll have to take a different tact. But my expectation and my base case is right now, where actually volumes come back, buying come back. I mean, volatility closed pretty weak into the close here, so it's kind of typically a signal that that we're overdone. And so I'd expect we have a pretty decent week next week.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's it for us for this week. Look forward to seeing everybody next week. And I am going to get that podcast. It's definitely worth watching or listening to. I learned a lot just in the amount that I've watched so far, just in the editing. So definitely worth a look. Ben, enjoy your weekend and
Thank you,
all your
too.
tobogganing.
Take care, everybody.
Okay. Bye now.